book titled International Student Identities and Mental Well-Being Beyond the Single Story. This webinar is hosted by Council on International Higher Education, CIHE, of Association for the Study of Higher Education, ASHE. I would like to thank you all, panelists, audience, and ASHE office professionals for taking the time to be here and support international higher education community. My name is Katie. I am an associate professor at the Department of Counseling and Human Development Services at the University of Georgia. I am serving the ASHE CIHE as a vice chair, and I am one of the editors for the book that we are going to talk about today. I'm happy to co-facilitate the webinar with my wonderful colleague, Gudrun. Before we get into the content of the webinar, let me briefly introduce ASHE and CIHE for those who are relatively new to this community. So the ASHE is a scholarly society with approximately 2,400 members dedicated to higher education as a field of study, and it is committed to diversity in its programs and memberships. CIHE is one of the council under the ASHE umbrella. So CIHE is a Council on International Higher Education. This is a community to provide a formal structure within ASHE for scholars with interest in international higher education, can promote theory and research to explore the cultural and international perspective in the study of higher education. This is a list of our CIHE executive board member, and I am serving the community as vice chair. So related to our mission of supporting and fostering learning through the generation and sharing of knowledge, ASHE, we acknowledges the painful history and genocide in the United States for Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous people. We honor and respect the many and diverse tribal nations and peoples who were forcefully removed from, as well as those still connected to this land. So I live and work in Georgia, and Georgia is the original homeland of Cherokee tribal nations. So this is a brief agenda for today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce my co-facilitator and the editor of the book, Gudrun. The podium is yours. And let me stop the screen.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gudrun Nyunt. I use she, her pronouns. I am an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University, and I'm joining you today from the homeland of the Anishinaabe peoples, also known as the Council of the Three Fires, which is the location of Northern Illinois University. And so a little bit about myself. I came to the US as an international student from Austria. And so that's kind of where my interest in this topic stemmed from. And then I worked for 7 years as a practitioner in residence life at various institutions before getting my PhD and then becoming a faculty member. And so when we were conceptualizing this book, right, we really talked about how we wanted it to be a guide for practitioners on how to improve praxis, right? And practitioners broadly, because as faculty member, right, we all work with international students as well. And so really anyone in higher education that works with international students, we wanted to create this book that is a mix of research, of promising practices, of some case studies to allow people to understand, right, how to do these things or test some of the knowledge that they gain through reading the book. And so that's how our book came about. The other thing we really wanted to focus on in the book is intersectionality as a framework. Often when we talk about international students, we talk about them as one group, right? And we ignore the differences in experiences based on their intersecting identities. And so throughout the book, we really tried to highlight how experiences differ based on where internationals come from, how they identify, right? All these different factors that play into that. And so our book is kind of a unique mix of some research-based chapters, some promising practices chapters that also, right, pull in some research, but also practitioner knowledge and expertise. and then also case studies. And so there's 4 parts to it. The first part of the book talks about just in general international students and their mental well-being and some of the important things to consider and contexts that may be important. Then the second section are research-based chapters that focus on intersecting identities. So ranging from everything like race and ethnicity, to sexual orientation and gender identity, to ability, being a graduate student, being a parent, right? We really highlight how these different intersecting identities may shape experiences in a unique way. And then we have practice-based chapters. And so those chapters really focused on, right, what are the things, knowing, right, all these things we learned from the previous chapter, what are the things that we can do to change the experiences of our international students and better support them? And then the last section are case studies. And so that really is an opportunity to apply what you learned from the rest of the book to, right, different situations, different contexts, different intersecting identities. And so, yeah, so we're really excited about this book. It's actually available as a free download, and we'll share more about this later on. But what we wanted to do today is just have a conversation with some of the authors of our book about, right, what they talked about in the book, but also a little bit, right, like what some of their experiences and what they've learned. And so what we're going to do is we'll start with short introductions of our 3 panelists. And so panelists, if you can share your name, positions, experiences of working with international students, and chapters that you contributed to the book. And then after that, we'll kind of engage in a conversation, right, with some guiding questions, but also just talking with each other to see what are some of the things that stand out to all of us. And so Patty, would you like to get us started? Patty was one of our co-editors, so there was an editorial team of 4 of us, with Katie, Patty, and then Mindy and Andino, who served as our fourth editor. All right, Patty, it's all you.
Sure. Thanks, Gudrun. Hello, I'm Patty Witkowsky. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Leadership, Research, and Foundations at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. My background, my initial interest in working with international students stemmed from my experience living and working in Japan directly after undergrad. And so having that cross-cultural experience and understanding the challenges of being in a new culture helped me when I came back to study higher education and become interested in supporting international students in the US. So I started that 20 years ago working with international student orientation. I contributed to enhancing the orientation program for international students at the University of Maryland that really was focusing mostly on immigration information. So we worked to develop a more comprehensive program to meet all of their variety of needs. And then I was able to serve as an orientation director at a Hispanic serving institution where we created a newly designed orientation program, which allowed the opportunity to collaborate with international student affairs professionals to make sure that the needs of our international students were being met in the orientation program, also in a holistic way. And then now as a faculty member, as Gudrun mentioned, I contribute to literature focusing on international students' transitions to US higher education. And most recently, just about a month ago, I returned from a semester at sea voyage, where we had a number of international students who experienced a variety of challenges on the voyage because of some diversions and needing to go to different ports and some of the immigration challenges that they experienced. So have some recent and direct experience working with international students and supporting them through those challenges. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Patty. Soeun, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Soeun Park. I'm an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona here in Los Angeles. And it's nice to meet you, everyone. And I hope you're having a great day, great Friday. So I myself was an international student when I started my study in 2013 as a PhD student at the University of Iowa. And up until 2019, that's the year that I graduated from my PhD program, I lived as an international student myself. And that experience was the first and foremost in my motivation to support for the international student community. And into 2018 and 2019, sorry, I'm blurring my experience of the years with the pandemic involved, but at the end of my year of a PhD training and the postdoc years, I was at the University of Pennsylvania Counseling Center as a counselor to work with students there. And at that center, that was my first experience of working with international students, not just living as an international student, providing individual psychotherapy as well as group psychotherapy, also providing some outreach workshops. And that was the first experience as well for me to, really get some support from my colleagues, because that was the center that they have a really diverse range of staff population. So that was a valuable experience. And that was also the time that when the other authors, Dr. Kim, who is the first author of this chapter that we wrote, came up with an idea of writing something for international students. And coincidentally, we were reached out by Dr. Katie Koo in terms of writing a book chapter for and about international students. And we realized that this is a great opportunity for us to share our clinical experiences of providing bilingual therapy to international students and how that can help international students' mental health and psychological well-being. So this might be a good time to introduce the chapter we wrote. The chapter goes like this: when language changes, so does the counseling process. Promising practices for providing individual counseling to bilingual Korean international students in the United States. So like I said, this chapter is about providing individual counseling in bilingual English and Korean, but that was not just mere the change of the language. We really experienced considering a lot of intersectionalities, as other facilitators have said. So it was a valuable experience that we really wanted to share with the more, wider public population. So it was a great experience for me to write that with other authors.
Thank you so much. And Missy, could we have you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. It's morning for me from Texas, but my name is Dr. Missy Coleman. I go by Missy. I currently work as a licensed staff psychologist at Texas A&M University here in College Station. I came to the US as an international student, first as an exchange student in high school, and then I transitioned into college as an international student, went through grad school as an international student, and currently am a foreign worker is what I'm referred to as. And so I have lived experiences as an international student. While in grad school, during my clinical training, I became very involved in working with international students through our Office of International Support Services. So I did a lot of outreach programming for our students through that office. Some of them were as simple as, how to write a resume within a US style, how to correct, and I use the word loosely, but how to correct written language for students who were having difficulty writing papers, navigating the right and center, and then more mental health aspects, how to adjust, coping, making friends, managing distress. And so thankfully, while in grad school, I was able to form community with other international students from different parts of the world. And I was also able to do my thesis on the experiences of Black international students, so Black, African, and Caribbean international students. And from that research side, it really validated some of the experiences that I had, some of the experiences that my friends had. And it also gave me an opportunity to learn about the experiences of other international students. And then in my dissertation, I again looked at the experiences of international students, specifically racial identity development of Black African international students within the context of the US racial identity system. And that also really informed my understanding of racial dynamics for international students. And my data collection was very interesting because it was happening. I started collecting data in 2020, and a lot happened in 2020. the pandemic happened, the other pandemic with racial crisis and within the United States was also happening. And so I think it was a really interesting time for me to be connected with Black African international students talking about their racial identity as we were really experiencing this racially charged environment. And I think some of my research has also translated into my clinical work. Currently, I oversee a program called Let's Talk. It's available in other universities as well. But with Let's Talk, one of the offices that we work with is the International Students Scholar Support Services Office. And that's one way that I've continued my work with international students by providing outreach services for them through this office, providing a space like Let's Talk where it's very informal so they can, get the experience of talking with a counselor to help mitigate some of the stigma that is associated with mental health help seeking in a lot of cultures. Also puts a face to a counselor to sort of make it real. Like this is a real person who has some of my shared experiences and maybe feels a little familiar to me. I also provide individual therapy to international students. I work primarily with first generation students and students of color. And at Texas A&M, there's a lot of overlap in those identities. So some of my students are first generation students who are also international students. And that's a very unique experience, right? You're trying to navigate college and you're trying to navigate college living in a different country a lot of the times by themselves. So thankfully, I continue to be able to work with international students. And I think that my lived experience as first an international student and now a foreign worker really allows me to connect with these students because like I was them not that long ago. I only graduated in 2021. And so some of these experiences are very fresh. And I'm just really grateful that I got to be able to work on this book chapter. I worked with another person, Dr. Parker, and she's not here. But it was a very, very learning and humbling, sometimes very humbling experience for me right in this. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you all. And so I have a couple questions that I will pose, but we'll also try to see if there's questions from the audience to add those later. But so to get us started, right, higher education institutions often recruit international students due to their financial contributions to the institution. I don't know about you all. I hear a lot about that, right, at my institution with the enrollment cliff coming up. And everyone's like, oh, international students is where we need to focus, right? But then we know that our offices, our international student services offices are often understaffed. Other staff members don't necessarily know how to support international students. And so based on what you shared in your chapters, what do you perceive as some of the contributing structures, policies, processes, or practices that negatively impact international student mental well-being? Soeun, do you want to start us off?
Sure. That is a big question to answer. So I'll see how much I can share with this within this space. I would say, first of all, when I think about myself coming to the United States, the first and foremost, the challenge that I faced was financial support. During my PhD training, I started without funding for the first semester of my training, and it was a big challenge because I had to pay everything out of my pocket. So even though maybe from an institution's perspective, they recruit international students for a financial reason, myself as an international student struggled a lot because of the financial limited access to financial resources. And there were a lot of barriers because international students cannot work outside of campus. And finding a funding resource was also very much difficult because I did not know anyone at the university who could fund me. And would I be able to reach out to people at the university? I was able to reach out to a lot of resources because I really wanted to get that funding resources for myself. But I also had a lot of challenges really presenting myself, and it was first time for me to live in the United States, and so adjusting to the culture was a big barrier for me, a big struggle for me. and understanding that how can I just very simply speaking, just to send, how can I send an email to this professor that I don't know and explain the financial hardship that I'm experience, but at the same time, I am capable of doing some stuff that I can do, like a research, assistant and research assistants, or, even like working at a library, I can do that. How can I just persuade that so that I can be funded by the university? That was a very much big struggle for me, for sure. And I also have seen this was not a concern that I struggled. Only I myself struggled. There were a lot of students, other international students, who also struggled for this reason. So I would say when it comes to a systemic barrier or structures, that's the first thing that I can think of right now. And also I would say sometimes this is something that I have been experiencing up until now. And also it took a lot for me to understand what this issue means to me. So I'm pretty sure that this would be this might be different for everyone, but something that I wanted to share was, sometimes as an international student, I really want to communicate with my own community, which is a Korean community. I need that support from the community. I want to be seen and heard by my own community. That's the first support that I would seek as an international student. But at the same time, I really want to also reach out to another community that I don't know. That's why I'm here. That's the reason why I came to another country, a new country, to really diversify my own experiences. And this kind of conflict, is this the support that I want? But I also want to walk out of my comfort zone and reach out to non-international student community. This is also some of the concerns that I heard from international students that I worked with, also written in the chapter that we wrote. And that's sometimes misunderstood by the institution, who coupled international student with the other international students who share the identity, assuming that that's the only support that international students might need. So I really want institution understand the diverse needs of international students, and when it comes to the support, it could be coming from their own community, but also it could be coming from non-international students who could open their eyes and diversify their experiences. So I don't know if that makes sense, but those are the two things that I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense. Missy, are there things that you want to add?
Yes. So in addition with what you had shared, Soeun, one of the things that we had talked about in a chapter with Dr. Paraka that I'd worked on was the experiences of discrimination and prejudice. And that's more of a structural systemic experience. And to break it down a little bit more, for a lot of international students who move to the United States, there's a different understanding of racial dynamics. There's a different experience of being a racialized being in their home countries. For example, there are a lot of countries in the world that don't structure society from a racial perspective, but the US does. And moving in here, that can be really jarring for a lot of international students. And that can sometimes be a systemic barrier when students are experiencing racism for the first time, or experiencing colorism or texturism for the first time. And they're trying to make sense of what these things mean and trying to get support for how it impacts their own individual experiences and how it impacts them on a community level. And I don't know that that's something that universities are always mindful of or particularly understanding of. I remember that in my undergraduate university, when there was a time where I would have a really hard time filling paperwork because it would ask me about my racial identity, and the options that it gave me, I was none of those things. And it would be really challenging, or I'd have experiences of blatant or maybe more covert discrimination, and I wouldn't really understand what was happening or why I was experiencing those things. But I don't know that universities have done a good job recognizing this. And following up on that, another thing that maybe comes out of that experience of discrimination and prejudice is also that language and accent discrimination that international students tend to experience. Sometimes international students speak other languages in addition to English. Sometimes they speak English as their primary language with a different accent. But there are practices like having international students take a language exam like the TOEFL to prove that they're proficient in this language, even though their academic records are in English and their interview was in English and their application documents were in English, right? Or having to take a spoken English exam to prove that you can teach a course as a graduate student for your graduate assistantship. These are all different aspects of discrimination or different prejudiced experiences that international students experience on a more systemic scale that I don't know that universities have really paid attention to. There are a lot of others, but I think I'll just start with these two.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. Your comment also made me think about another chapter in our book that focuses on social justice education. And so, right, like oftentimes within social justice education, the focus is, right, on inclusion, on equity, but international students are often left out of that because they have a different understanding of what even diversity, equity, inclusion, race, ethnicity, right, like what all of these things mean. And so that for those of you, right, who are gonna hopefully look at the book afterwards, that might be a good chapter to think about and look at of some of the barriers that Missy mentioned. What are ways that we can address that? Patty, what do you want to add and share with us?
Sure, thank you. I failed to include what chapter I assisted in authoring on the text, and that was the text or the chapter about orientation and transition programming. I was able to co-author with 3 other current practitioners working in international student orientations, and we were able to provide information about pre-arrival supports, a robust programming content that you would have in an orientation program, and then lastly, some post-orientation peer mentor program supports that could be provided as well. So that's where we started, and the contributions that I was able to make based on the experiences that I shared earlier as well. I think just to start out, the important thing to consider as we think about the transitions, which Dr. Park and Missy both shared, was thinking about what are some of the issues that students experience as they're coming into their programs. And so first one, thinking about their preparation. So as we've also, many of you have shared as well, just the variety of experience of international students and thinking about international students as a one-size-fits-all community and understanding that they have a variety of different preparations in terms of English language proficiency, length of previous residence in the US. These are some contributions that they might have. Also psychological differences. So they might have different stresses, different levels of self-efficacy. Their personalities may be different. They might have different levels of homesickness and experiences that are happening in their home countries and with their families back in their countries. And then also socialization. So thinking about acculturation, also the level of interactions that they have with host nationals. Dr. Park shared about also the idea of wanting to integrate and work with, not just be with her own community, but with communities. And that's the reason that international students are coming to the US, is to have that experience. And so understanding their differing levels of socialization around that piece. And then also, as Missy shared, also the experiences around discrimination and prejudice that they might have based on the identities that they bring. So for some of the issues that come about regarding the structures of orientation and transition programs is really what I saw 20 years ago when I was starting and when I was working and really focusing the extreme focus on the immigration rules and regulations, students coming to the US and being put into this fear position of if you don't do this and if you don't do that, and really constantly just being in fear as they come to the US, as opposed to being welcomed and showed that we have that many institutions have a high level of support for them. And so I think that's a piece that institutions really need to be careful of, is creating that fear for international students, while also, of course, educating them on the things that they need to be doing to remain in good standing with immigration rules and practices. Also, I think just making sure that because students have unique cross-cultural adjustment needs in comparison to their host national counterparts, making sure that educational interventions are focusing on things like developing their social cultural skills, their ability to identify support networks, also as Dr. Park shared, and giving that support and that education around how to work within the US culture and navigate some of the bureaucracy of US institutions, and then also academic integration. So understanding that the way that our US classrooms and higher education is structured and the expectations that are in place. I think also a challenge of international student orientations, we see many times that international students come early and they're often isolated from their host country peers. And so much of the campus knowledge about resources and culture provided during transition programming applies to both international students as well as their host country counterparts. And so finding ways to integrate both populations as they're going through the transition to the institution, because host nationals also need education around the culture of higher education in the US if they haven't been, if they don't know about higher education themselves much. And so making sure that we can find ways for international students as well as our host national students to develop meaningful relationships with each other is also another piece that I think sometimes gets disregarded as we think about some of the more what are important transition issues, but understand that creating that foundation for students at the beginning of their experience will lead them into having better experiences as they're on campus.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. And so we've talked about, right, some of the challenges that exist, and obviously changing organizational structures or societal, right, systemic issues can be really challenging. But based on what you wrote in your chapter, what are some simple, or at least comparatively, right, simple first steps that institutions can take to foster international students' mental well-being? And Missy, do you want to start us on this question?
Sure. So one of the things that we talked about in our chapter, which focused on the racialized experiences of international students of color. One of the things that we talked about in addressing mental health challenges is recognizing that not all international students have the same experience. And I think this is something that you've all alluded to, right? It can be harmful to come in with the sort of broadened perspective or a broadened way of addressing international students' needs with the assumption that we're a monolith or all the experiences are the same, because international students from the same country may have different experiences. International students within the same university may have different experiences, right? So I think that's one of the first steps for institutions and offices that work with international students, being in student affairs or mental health resources. And so giving international students their space to communicate what it is that they're experiencing, to communicate what it is that they're needing on a community level and on an individual level. And another first step that I think can be really helpful for institutions to consider is how exactly are they responding when international students reach out. And I say this as from a personal level and also from some of the information that I gathered in my research. If there is the pushback that these services are only for US students or domestic students, that can be really off-putting. That can create the impression that international students are only here for the benefit of the institution, not to get benefits from the institution. And of course, I recognize that there are some services that are funded with federal money or grants and what have you, and there are like stipulations about who can access those services. But even when international students may not qualify for certain services that they're seeking, redirection can be helpful instead of the sort of like the stop sign of like, don't go any further. This is not for you. This is not a service that you can benefit from. And a second part of that response is also making sure that we are receiving what students are saying, what international students are saying, and we're really actually listening and hearing instead of coming in with a lens of maybe individual biases that we may hold about different groups, stereotypes that we may hold about different groups, right? Kind of trying to step away from that and really hearing what it is that the student is saying and what it is that they're trying to communicate that they need. as a support.
Thank you. Those are some great first initial steps. Patty, what would you add?
Yes, thank you. So our chapter, as I noted, I don't really like referring, go see the chapter, but please go see the chapter so that you can read more of the detail, but really thinking about the orientation and transition process as the pre-arrival, the current experience when students get onto campus, and then the continuing transition experiences that they are going to have as they go through their educational experience in the US. So thinking first about some pre-arrival supports, I'll just start with that here, and just thinking about some of the ways that you can help students before they come to campus decrease the anxiety that they might feel because of all the things that they need to learn as they come into the US and then becoming a student. So it's multi-layered for their transition experience. And so first one is providing opportunities for them to create social connections with current and new international students will help them establish a sense of belonging. And so some ways to do that are to create Facebook or WhatsApp groups, WeChat channels, or even have real-time Zoom chats for students to just get on and start talking to folks prior to coming to campus. And so making sure that they feel like, oh, they already have some social connections prior to actually stepping physically in place. I think another piece, particularly for institutions, the large institutions that many of our international students attend, is thinking about the physical layout of the campus and making sure that there's some, maybe I think with COVID, it's been really great. The video tours really stepped up. And so most institutions will have a video tour and encouraging international students to take a look at the physical layout of their campus, where they'll be going from place to place. As well as thinking about what terminology that they might hear when they're on campus. I think nicknames of buildings or acronyms of offices can be challenging for everyone. And so making sure that some of the things that they may hear frequently as they first come to campus, that those are explained to them and brought out and really explicated in a way that makes sure that they understand and aren't, having additional challenges when they get to campus. And then I think also another piece of the social support can be creating a database of willing contacts that they have on their campus of whether current international students as well as alumni who may have previously been international students. I think that can go a long way in terms of making sure that students have a way to create connections with people who have the experiences that they may be having, or that who have already overcome some of the challenges that they are initially experiencing in their transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Soeun, what would you like to add?
Absolutely. I don't think this would be a simple step, but definitely a step that an organization and institution could move toward, which is hiring more people who have international backgrounds. And in the chapter we wrote, we have 2 case studies, and in both of the cases, they've shared how isolated they felt at school. And I remember having this conversation with Dr. Kim, who's the first author of the chapter, when we were working at the counseling center. What if the institution or the program that the students were in had more staff or more faculty member who could get what it's like to be living as an international student in the United States, could get having a family member who is terminally ill, but they are 1,000 miles away. What that means to them? Who could get that, or who could get speaking up or building a relationship with an advisor or authority figure here in the United States, as a person who was raised in a community or a society where they were told not to speak up because of the identity they have. So we were really kind of wishing that it would be a totally different story for our client if they were surrounded by those people who could get that experience. And we're also at the same time really grateful for the fact that we were able to provide those services and based on our experience, that we could get what they were experiencing or navigating. We're also grateful for that. So all of these, I really want to say that hiring more people who have international background to better support the international students. Another thing that I wanted to share is I really wish this was a single case, but one example that I want to share is from my colleague slash friend. One time when we were having a different meeting, just different professional meeting, she looked really upset, and we just had to ask what's going on with you. And she said that she had an institutional department meeting today, and there was a report for about the student population, what they needed, those kind of things. And she noticed that she herself as an international student as well, she noticed that international student was categorized with white students when they were reporting the mental health needs or their institutional support needs. So I was very sad to hear that. And that's why I'm saying that I wish that was a single case. But unfortunately, I hear that a lot, that sometimes international students are so minor, they are so small, so they are often categorized with the white students, which is a totally failing understanding the racial configuration of the international community, and also the other diverse identities that this community has. So another thing that probably the first step an institution can do is looking at the report and see whether international students are located and whether that it really represents the reality of the international students.
Yeah, that's a really great point, right? And a lot of institutions don't even collect some of that data, right? Or they ask about country of origin, which is not the same as race ethnicity necessarily. And so, yeah, even a step before that, right, is collecting that data and then sharing that so that faculty, staff, employees know this is who the international students are at our institution. So my last question for the panelists is, and I mentioned that this is my last question, so audience member, if you have questions, feel free to start putting them in the chat or in our Q&A so that we'll be able to address those later. But so my last question is, reflecting on your own experiences, whether personal or professional experiences, the knowledge you gained through the research engagement, what is one thing that you wish individuals working with international students would know about this population? And Patty, why don't you get us started this time?
Thank you. I think the main thing, we've said it multiple times, it's not a one size fits all experience. There's so many different demographics that need to be considered when we are thinking about our international student populations. And I think ultimately it's about being able to identify students who are in stress and who are really struggling. And that might not be an entire population, and it might be at a population at a certain time based on whatever is going on in the world, whatever is going on in their countries. And the types of support that we might need to provide can be different and emerging. But also just the importance of keeping a pulse on understanding that international students are a unique population, should not be lumped together with our domestic students, and also not lumped together as one population themselves. And so I think the complexity that the book highlights with the variety of different chapters, obviously I was on the editorial board, but we were excited to be able to really highlight so many different aspects of identities that international students hold, in addition to their status and their identity as an international student in the US. And so making sure that we are continuing to learn and continuing to understand the experiences of international students and how those are changing, because as soon as you write something, it's out of date because something new has happened and world contexts have changed. And so I think that's a big piece. Like I said, I just got off of the semester at Sea Voyage. We had many, many diversions because they chose for us not to go through the Suez Canal. And so because of that, we had new ports, and the new ports really highlighted passport privilege. And so some of the international students were able to still visit all of the ports that we went to, and many other students were not able to do that. And so we were providing different supports for them when they were not able to have the full experience that they thought they were going to be able to have on the voyage. And so I think that really highlighted just a difference within the community. There were, I think, 40 international students, and there were 18 who couldn't get off in Cape Town, South Africa. And so to say, oh, all of the international students, we can't say that. It was just these 18 students that had that experience. And so, while we were prior saying all of our non-US passport holders are international students, that passport privilege really came out in that experience. And so I think that just highlights the differences that they experience, and really having the conversations and making sure that we're continuing to update ourselves and continue to learn about their needs is really what we can do for the population.
Yeah, thank you. Soeun, what would you like to add?
Sure. I'd like to share two of my experiences that can, that can show how individuals working in international student can support them. So I remember this hallway conversation with one of the faculty members in my program during my PhD training. I didn't know this faculty member that much, but looking myself, I think this person very much knows like where I might be coming from. And this person asked me, so are you going back to Taiwan after your program? And I had a lot of emotional reactions, of course. First, I'm not from Taiwan. I am from South Korea. And also coming back to my own country is such a complicated decision. I was thinking maybe if I am sponsored, but in terms of the visa sponsorship or not, I don't feel like that is my decision. It's really up in the air. So when I was asked that question for multiple times, are you coming back or not? I felt very confused. It's not simple like that. So that was one experience. And another experience that I want to share is very contrasting. When I came to the counseling center at the University of Pennsylvania, one of my supervisors told me that something like this: you are such a valuable asset to our center, to your own community, Korean students for sure, but also the broader community, us just in of all. And that was really changing my mindset to see my value, my value as an international person in this country, and that really helped me navigate through the hardship of the internship that year. So something that I really wanted to share to the people who are working with the international students is trust the potential of an international student has. Sometimes they might sound like a native speaker, and that might affect how you see the student, the capability that the students can show. But I really encourage that doesn't really cover your block, your trust in this person, an international student, how much that they can do, the potential that they have. So that's just trusting the potential, being aware of your own biases, be based on the accent or the language proficiency the student have, for example, would be something that I really, really wanted to share, and so that no one can make the mistake that I shared in my first episode.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Missy, what would you like to add?
I think in addition to what's already been shared, one thing that I would like to add is recognizing that international students come with a wealth of strengths, and they're not always students who are always in need, right? A student can need support and also have strengths to offer. And I think sometimes for people who work with international students, it's well-meaning coming from a place of wanting to support, wanting to help. But sometimes that focus can be a little more deficits focused instead of strengths focused. International students are human beings. They have personalities, they have interests, they have goals, they have things that they've done, they have experiences that other people haven't had. And so they have a wealth of strength, a wealth of knowledge that they can share. And so in working with them, kind of remembering that these are people who also have strengths that they can draw from.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. And that's a really good point to kind of end on, at least for the facilitated section, but we're starting to see some questions pop up in the Q&A. So we'll dive, as much as we have time, we'll dive into those. So the first one is thoughts and opinions on housing, financial issues, and how that is affecting international students who cannot travel in more than 30 days before the course start date, and also with limited availability that is affordable at that time. Would anyone like to share some thoughts on that?
I can share. Just think that it's not a surprise that international students are having these experiences, and it is a requirement of those offices and of the institutions to be able to create structures that then facilitate the ability to overcome some of those things. So instead of placing all of the onus of responsibility on the student and making it be their main concern without feeling like they have the support and that there are things put in place prior, I think it really just requires some strategic thinking on the part of the institutions to then to create some relationships around partnerships and things like that, so that then it's not all lying on the students and they know that, again, they have the support. It's not always going to be a clean process, but to just act as if, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen as an institution, that's simply neglect at that point.
Yeah, we actually at my institution struggled with that last year because we had an international graduate students, and we don't see a ton of, we're seeing an increase in international graduate students in our higher ed student affairs program, but we haven't previously had that. And so it really highlighted for us just how, as an institution, we didn't know what to say, right? And so that's gotten us thinking about, okay, what are some ways, right? Like, are there even just within if you have a small program like us, are there ways for our current students to share, here's where I'm living and here's some context, right? That might be helpful in making some of those connections early on to help with that.
Yeah, something that I was going to share that in my undergraduate institution had been really helpful was having an international student hall, and then graduate housing that was for international graduates. And domestic students could sign up for those, but they were limited in when they could sign up and how many slots were allotted, with majority of the slots going for international students. And that was a way that they managed the housing challenge and international students not being solely responsible. Because when you're coming from a different place and now you're having to figure out how to rent an apartment, figure out where to live with no credit history in a country that you've just started living in. So that's something that other institutions maybe could practice.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question. How can universities help create and encourage leadership qualities among international students who come from a collective community culture into US, where it is a lot more individualistic? Any thoughts on that? I would say, right, a lot of our leadership practices are really grounded in whiteness. And so it's not just international students who struggle with that. I had a student who's doing his dissertation on leadership, and part of it was challenging to even get students to sign up at our institution, which is relatively, we're an emerging HSI and have a relatively diverse student body, right? Because students didn't connect to the term leader and didn't want to connect to the term leader. They thought of themselves more as a community member, an advocate, a change agent, but they didn't really see themselves in how people describe leader. And so I think part of it is, how do we change how we talk about leadership to make it more inclusive to the way leadership is practiced in other cultures? Panelists or Katie, any other thoughts to add?
I would just add the mentorship around others, people who have come to the U.S. and had the experiences themselves, and creating the connections for students to learn about, there is the integration that needs to happen. How are you operating within the U.S. structure and system, and to find out what's the approach that they took, and really like being intentional about saying, we're having a leadership, if you have a leadership office, some institutions are lucky to have a leadership development office. If you have that, have those opportunities within that office to create the mentoring networks for students to learn from others, I think is a good place. And then also when there are those educational experiences, learning about leadership theory, really looking critically at the theories and thinking about and having the conversation, opening it up. What if you're not from the US? What if your culture is different? How does this look different? And whether or not the folks have the answers, but at least providing the question and creating a space for the discussion can help open that up and maybe have some insights.
I'd like to share a little bit about that as well. I would say it's not just about collectivistic versus individualistic. It's more about how those values or cultural aspects are coupled with other things. Like, for example, I would say when collectivistic values are coupled with connection and sharing, it would be such a great leadership characteristics for any individual, whether that is international or not. But I would say in my own experiences or working with international students, I have realized that when collectivistic values are coupled with the respect for authority figure, a lot of international students struggling with being really independent and working on the individual project and also speaking up for themselves. I think as an institution, it's really important how those kind of values or value systems are affecting to their day-to-day interpersonal communications, behaviors, or mental or other like mental health challenges. I think it's really important for an institution to understand that very much specific challenges that the international students are facing.
Yeah, thank you. And so just for the sake of time, I will turn it over to Katie Koo for kind of closing us out. I know we have a couple more questions. And so panelists, if you want to look at those questions and type answers or share some thoughts, please do so. And Katie, why don't you close us out?
Thank you, Gudrun. So like Gudrun just mentioned, so we have a couple of questions that were not answered. And panelists, please go ahead and visit the questions and then answer as much as you can before it turns to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So I'd like to take some moment to thank all the panelists. I'm very impressive that ASHE, which is the higher education webinar, host with the speakers with a psychology background, staff psychologist, and the former staff psychologist. So, well, kudos for this speakers and also kudos to Gudrun, who was a really great facilitator. So thank you all for coming and contribute to society and to support international students' mental health. Thank you, thank you. And I'd like to thank to the ASHE office, Alicia, for helping us and also all the audience. Let me briefly share a screen just to highlight the last do I share my so this is the book, and then you can scan the QR code here and then you can get access to the free download digital copy access, and also you can purchase the print the version if you prefer to get the real paper book. So please go ahead and read and then get experiences of what the speakers just talk about. And before we go, I'd like to briefly talk about the ASHE community and CIHE community. If you fell in love with this community as you listen to this webinar, please go ahead and sign up as a membership. These are the benefits to be the member and being in the community. As you join the community, you work with me and Gudrun and these other speakers in the community. And lastly, we have our annual convention coming up for November at Minneapolis. So if you want to work with the higher education field, then if you're interested in to know more about this community, please join us. Well, thank you all, and please have a great Friday afternoon. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, facilitators, and ASHE office and audience. Thank you so much. Bye. I'd like to know how to stop sharing the screen.